The letter arrived on the kind of October afternoon when the light comes in low and the town of Belfield, Pennsylvania, holds still for an hour before dark. It was 4:18. The chestnut oaks along Depot Street had turned the color of old copper, and the wind moved through them without any urgency at all. It moved the way wind moves in places where nobody is in a hurry to get anywhere. Levi Dawson stood in the front office of the town hall, on the worn side of the counter, holding a paper cup of coffee gone cold an hour before. Mrs. Halverson, the town clerk, slid an envelope across the counter toward him. She did not say anything. She had a way of not saying things that other people filled in with their own worry. Levi had learned over 19 years to read a silence like that, the way his father had taught him to read a torque wrench. By feel. By the small click of resistance before the give. His name was on the envelope, typed, Levi Dawson, in the square gray letters of a machine somebody had not replaced since before he was born. He could not think of a single person left alive who knew his name well enough to type it. His father had known it. Roy Dawson had said the name the way some men say a prayer, low and steady and without fuss, and Roy Dawson had been dead 22 months. There had been a stretch of road outside Erie, a January night, black ice on a curve nobody had salted. After that, there had been a cardboard box of tools, a 1989 Ford F-150 with 210,000 miles on it, and a Chilton's repair manual with the cover half torn away. That was the inheritance. That was all of it. Levi turned the envelope over. The return address was a law office on Main Street. Cyrus Penny, attorney at law, and below it a line of smaller print he had to tilt toward the window to read. He did not open it there. He had learned not to open important things in front of people, because his face did things he could not always control. A man living out of a truck cannot afford to be seen losing his composure in a public building. He nodded once to Mrs. Halverson. He went out onto the granite steps, into the low copper light, and he sat down with the envelope across his knees. The letter was short. A man named Henry Cobbett had died on the 19th of September. He had left a will. In that will, the letter said, Levi Dawson was named, and the attorney requested his presence at the office at 9 o'clock the next morning to discuss the particulars. Levi read it 3 times. He did not know anyone named Henry Cobbett. He turned the name over in his mouth the way you turn a key in a lock that does not want to give. Cobbett. There was nothing there. No face, no voice, only the shape of a stranger's name on a page. A man he had never met had spent some of the last hours of his life writing Levi's name into a legal document, and Levi could not imagine why. A truck downshifted out on the state road, the long groan of an engine taking a grade, then another, then quiet. The light was almost gone when he stood up. He walked the 4 blocks to where he had parked the F-150, in the cracked lot behind the old tractor supply that had closed 2 winters back. The lot was a good place. It was out of the wind, the streetlight at the corner still worked, and nobody came around to tell a man he could not sleep there. He had a routine for the cold. A sleeping bag rated to 0, a wool blanket over it, the windows cracked half an inch so the glass would not fog and freeze. He had learned all of it the hard way that first winter. He had nearly frozen because he had not known that breath turns to ice on the inside of a windshield. He did not eat that night. He was not hungry, and besides, he was rationing. He sat in the cab with the dome light on and took his father's Chilton's manual out of the door pocket where he kept it. The cover was gone past the first signature of pages. Somebody years ago had folded the book open so many times to the section on the Ford 300 inline 6 that it lay flat on its own now. The spine was broken in exactly that place, the way a Bible breaks open to the page a person reads most. Roy had read it that way. Not for the engine, Levi thought. For the steadiness of it. For something to hold with his hands and his eyes at the end of a long day when there was nothing else. Levi read the page on timing. He did not need to. He knew it cold. At 2:30 in the morning, he could not sleep, and he reached into the glove box and took out the pencil. It was a carpenter's pencil, flat, the kind that will not roll off a workbench. His father had chewed the end of it down to splinters over the years, and the wood was soft and pale where teeth had worked it. Levi put it between his back teeth. He did not bite a pen this way, only this pencil. It was a thing he could not have explained to anyone, and he had stopped trying to explain his own habits to himself a long time ago. He lay in the dark with the pencil in his teeth and the manual on his chest. He thought about the name Henry Cobbett until the words came loose from their meaning. After a while, they were only sounds. He set his phone alarm for 7. Morning came gray and hard, with the first real frost of the year laid white over the windshield. Levi scraped it with an old plastic spatula he kept for the purpose. The radio said deer season opened the 30th. Somewhere off in the hills behind the town, a man was already sighting in a rifle, the flat crack of it rolling down through the cold air every minute or so. Patient, unhurried. He was at the law office at 5 minutes to 9. Cyrus Penny was a heavyset man somewhere past 60, with reading glasses pushed up onto a bald head and a coffee ring on every paper on his desk. He did not stand when Levi came in. He looked at him over the top of a folder for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he was not expecting to see. Then he gestured to the chair across the desk. "You're younger than I figured," Penny said. "Sit down, this is going to take a while, and I'd rather only say it once." Levi sat. "You knew Henry Cobbett?" Penny asked. "No, sir." Penny grunted, as if that confirmed something. He opened the folder. Hal Cobbett was the foreman at the old Belfield Pacific Roundhouse for 31 years. Ran the place until they shut the line down in 2003. He turned a page. Then he retired, and then he kept showing up anyway. A man who's done one thing for 31 years doesn't always know how to do nothing. And he died last month? He did. Lungs, mostly. It was the asbestos. Penny said it flatly, without drama, the way a man states a fact he has had to state about too many people he knew. They lagged the steam pipes with it back then. The men breathed it for 40 years before anybody told them it would kill them slow. Half the old crew went the same way. Levi said nothing. He had no children, Penny went on. No wife living, no people I could find anywhere, and in his will he left the contents of one locker to you. Number 7, in the Roundhouse. Levi waited. There had to be more, because there is always more, and a lawyer does not ask a man to sit for a long story to tell him about a locker. "Here's the trouble," Penny said. He took off the reading glasses and set them down. "The Roundhouse is town property, has been since 2008. Hal's will gives you the locker and everything in it." He tapped the folder. "But it also says the contents can't be moved, can't be touched, can't be sorted by anybody but you. On the original site. Why? There's a clause in the land grant from 1924. The building and its contents are tied together in law. You can't pull one locker out of the structure without breaking the chain. So either the will fails, or the town hands you the whole thing." "The whole thing," Levi repeated. "The whole Roundhouse. 14 stalls, the turntable, 8 acres of woods behind it that Hal owned outright and folded into the bequest." Penny put the glasses back on. "The council tool met about it twice. They've got a demolition contract already signed, 33 days out, because the place is a liability and they're tired of insuring a ruin." He almost smiled. "But if they tear it down before this will settles, the estate sues, and I advised them they'd lose. That's me. I advised them they'd lose." "So what happens?" "What happens is they transfer the deed to you for $10. That's the lowest figure the law will let them call a real sale." Penny leaned back. "You take the Roundhouse, you take the locker, and the demolition contract becomes your problem instead of theirs. Or you sign a paper that says no. They bulldoze the lot in 5 weeks. And whatever Hal Cobbett wanted you to have goes into a dumpster." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. On top of it, a $10 bill folded once. "That's mine," Penny said. "Hal left instructions. You're to buy it with his money, not yours. He was particular about that. Wouldn't tell me why." Levi looked at the $10 bill for a long time. He had $340 to his name. He had a truck that needed a water pump. He had no address, no job past next week's odd work, and no idea on God's earth who Henry Cobbett was. The reasonable thing was to sign the paper that said no, walk out, and let the dead stranger's secret go into the ground with the building. He picked up the $10 bill. "Where is it?" he said. The Belfield Pacific Roundhouse sat at the bottom of the rail yard, where the town gave way to the river. Half a mile down a gravel road the frost had heaved into ruts. Penny drove him in a Buick that smelled of pipe tobacco. Neither of them said much. The road ran between 2 rows of bare sycamores, their bark peeling in pale sheets. Then the trees opened up and the Roundhouse was simply there. It was there the way a thing is there when it has stood longer than anyone watching it. It was built in a half circle, a great brick crescent, the color of dried blood, with 14 tall, stalled doors facing inward toward a center pit. The roof had fallen in over the far stalls, and the sky showed through the rafters in those bays like teeth gone from a jaw, but the near end stood. Stalls 1 through 7 held their roofs, the brick was sound, and over the central doors a faded board still read "Bell." Pacific in letters that had once been gold. In the middle of the crescent was the turntable. It was a great steel bridge set down in a circular pit, the device they had used to swing a locomotive around and aim it at whichever stall it needed. Rust had taken the rails to the color of the brick, but the pivot at the center still held. When Levi stepped down onto it, the whole bridge gave the faintest groan and shifted under his weight. It was balanced, even now, on a bearing some man had packed with grease before Levi's father was born. The cold inside smelled of coal. That surprised him. The place had been dead 25 years, and still the smell of coal dust was in the brick and the timber. It was soaked so deep that a quarter-century of weather had not washed it out. Under it lay the smell of old oil and iron, and the mineral cold of a stone building in autumn. He stood a moment and let his eyes adjust. Pigeons had been in the high stalls. Their leavings whitened the broken rafters, and a few of them shifted now, up in the dark, watching. Pokeweed had come up purple and rank through a crack in the floor where the roof had let the rain in. A length of fire hose, rotted to lastress, hung on a hook by the door, and beside it a row of brass nozzles, green with age. Everywhere there were the marks of work. The floor by each stall was worn into two pale grooves where men had walked the same 6 steps 10,000 times. The brick by the office window was rubbed smooth at shoulder height, where 40 years of Foreman had leaned to watch the yard. The town had let it go, but the work had not gone out of it. You could still read the work in the stone. That was the thing that struck him, standing there. A building could hold the shape of the hands that used it long after the hands were gone. Stall 7 was the last one with a roof. The locker stood against the back wall. It was a tall gray steel cabinet, the kind a man keeps his work clothes in, with a combination lock on a hasp. Penny handed Levi a slip of paper. On it, in a careful hand that had pressed hard enough to dent the page, 3 numbers were written. His writing, Penny said. He gave me that the week before he died. Said you'd be the one to open it. Levi knelt in front of the locker. His hands were not as steady as he would have liked. He worked the dial. Right, left, right. On the 3rd number, the hasp gave with a small dry click, and the door swung open on a hinge that had been oiled recently. Someone had oiled it. In the last weeks of his life, a dying man had come down to this cold building and oiled the hinge of a locker so the door would open easy for a stranger. Inside, the locker was orderly, the way a workman's things are orderly. On the top shelf was an envelope, sealed, thick, with Levi's full name across the front in the same hard-pressed hand. He did not open it. Something in him knew it was not yet time. A thing like that asked to be read in its own hour, not the first, and he set it carefully back on the shelf and left it there. Below it was a notebook, bound in red leather gone dark at the corners, the pages swollen with use. There was a photograph, black and white, curled at the edges. 2 men stood beside the front of a diesel locomotive, both of them grinning, both of them young. One held a wrench the length of his forearm. Levi did not know either face. There was a brass tag. It was small, 2 inches by 1 stamp, stamped with a single numeral, 7, and below it, 3 letters. BPL. A key ring hung from it, empty. The key it had once held was gone. Levi picked the tag up without knowing why. The brass was cold and heavy in his palm, worn smooth on one face where a thumb had rubbed it for years. He closed his hand around it. Something he could not name moved through his chest, and there was a toolbox. A red craftsman box scuffed to bare metal at the corners, the kind every working man of a certain generation owned. Levi opened it. Sockets in their tray, arranged by size, a ratchet, and a long extension bar. On the side of the extension bar, scratched into the chrome with the point of a scribe in clumsy block letters, was a name, Roy. Levi sat back on his heels. He was still kneeling there, the extension in one hand and the brass tag in the other, when a side door he had not noticed scraped open at the end of the stall. A woman came in out of the cold with a thermos under her arm. She was old, past 70, in a man's canvas coat and a knit cap. She walked with the slow, deliberate care of someone whose knees had given her trouble for 20 years and lost the argument. She stopped when she saw him kneeling there. She looked at his face for a long moment in the gray light coming down through the dust, and something in her own face came undone, gently, like a knot worked loose. Well, she said, you must be Roy's boy. Levi could not speak. The woman set her thermos down on the workbench, careful, the way a person sets down a thing when their hands have started to shake and they do not want it seen. You've got his hands, she said. I'd know those hands anywhere. He held a wrench the same way, like he was afraid it would fly off somewhere if he let go. Who are you? Levi managed. Edna Marsh. I kept the freight office across the yard for 30 years. She came closer, slow, and lowered herself onto an overturned crate with a small sound of effort. I knew your father when he was younger than you are now. And I knew Hal Cobbett for longer than that. Most of my life, I expect. She looked at the open locker, and at the brass tag in his hand, and her eyes went bright and stayed that way without spilling over. Hal told me you'd come, she said. Said it might take a while. Wills are slow, and he knew it. But he said the boy will come, and he'll be the one to open it. Edna, you make sure you're there when he does. She wiped her nose with the back of a wool glove. So here I am, an old woman with a thermos, keeping a promise to a dead man. She nodded at the thermos. It's coffee, it's not good, but it's hot, and you look like you haven't been warm in a while. Levi did not move to take it. He was looking at the photograph in the locker, the two grinning young men, and he held it up toward her. His voice was not steady at all. Is one of these him, Cobbett? Edna took the photograph in both hands. She looked at it the way you look at a window into a room you used to live in. That's Hal, she said, touching the man with the wrench, and that one. Her finger moved to the other young man, the one laughing with his head tipped back, and stopped. That one is your father. 1981, the summers he started here. The Roundhouse was very quiet. Far off in the hills, the rifle cracked once and rolled away. Your father knew this man, Levi, Edna said. She handed the photograph back. She held onto his hands a moment longer than she needed to, over the brass and the curling paper. Knew him better than your father ever knew himself, I think. There's a great deal here that nobody ever told you, and I expect that's about to change. Levi did not sleep again that night, but for the first time in a long while it was not the cold that kept him up. He came back to the Roundhouse the next morning at first light, and Edna was already there. She brought the thermos again and a paper sack of biscuits she had made herself. Hard at the edges, soft in the middle. She watched him eat 2 of them before she would say a word. She decided Levi understood that nothing in this story would be told to a hungry man. It was an old rule, and a good one, and he did not argue with it. Over the next 5 days he learned the shape of the place. Edna gave him the story the way you give medicine to someone who has gone too long without it. A little at a time. Never the whole bottle at once. She showed him how Hal had run the yard. There was a brass clicker on a cord by the office window, a counter you held in your palm and pressed with your thumb. Hal had used it to count cars as they rolled past, 40 years of cars, click by click. The thing was worn bright as gold where his thumb had ridden it. She showed Levi how Hal could name which engine was coming up the grade by the sound alone before it ever came into the yard. The way some men can name a bird by one note in the dark. And she told him about his father in pieces. Roy Dawson had come to Belfield in the spring of 1981, 22 years old, with a duffel bag and no people to speak of. He had been hired on, as an apprentice machinist, the lowest job in the place. Oiling bearings, sweeping the pit, learning slowly under Hal Cobbett what there was to know about keeping a locomotive alive. Hal had been 33 then, already foreman, already a widower, and already the kind of man, Edna said, who could not walk past a stray of any kind without taking it in. And your father was a stray, Edna said, not unkindly. Don't take that wrong. We were all strays down here one way or another. The railroad took the ones the rest of the world had passed over. She turned the clicker over in her fingers. But Roy was a special case. Hal saw something in him the first week. I never knew what exactly. I'm not sure Hal knew either, back then. She talked over those mornings, the way old people talk when they have finally been given someone to remember out loud to. The small things came back to her first. Hal had eaten the same lunch for 40 years, she said. A bologna sandwich folded over once, never cut, never any mustard. She had asked him about it exactly one time, in 1970-something, and he had said only that he had never picked up the habit, and that had been the end of the conversation. She still did not know what he meant by it. A habit of mustard, or a habit of being asked. And he cleaned the office windows every single morning, she said, with a shop rag he soaked in alcohol cut, with a little diesel. Everyone told him the diesel left a film. Hal said it cut grease better than spit, and that was that. The man would not take advice on a window. 40 years of mornings, the same rag, the same smell, until the whole office smelled faintly of a thing that should have smelled bad, and somehow, after enough time, just smelled like Hal. You learn a person by their nonsense, Edna said, not their good deeds. Anybody can do a good deed once. It's the nonsense they keep up for 40 years that tells you who they were. She showed Levi the red leather notebook, opened it on the workbench in the cold morning light. It was Hal's hand, all of it, but it was a teaching book. Page after page, Hal had written down for Roy the things you cannot learn from a manual. How to set the rollers on the turntable pit so the bridge would swing true. How to read the color of a bearing to know how hot it had run, and on one page, dated June of 1981, there was a drawing of a long screwdriver held against the side of a wheel. Beneath it, in Hal's careful block print, an instruction to listen to a journal bearing. Hal had written, "You do not use your ears first. You put the steel of a long screwdriver against the brass cap of the journal. You set the wooden handle against the bone behind your ear. You let the steel carry the sound up into your skull. A good bearing hums low and even, like a cat asleep. A bad one is starving, the oil is gone, the brass is dry, and it sings high and thin. That high note is the only warning you will ever get. After that, the axle seizes its speed and throws the whole train off the rail. You learn the difference once, then you never forget it. Forgetting it kills people." Beneath the instruction, in a different ink added later, Hal had written, "Roy got it on the third try, faster than I did." Levi read that line 4 times. There were other lessons in the book, and Edna walked him through some of them while the coffee went cold between them. The turntable had its own page. Hal had drawn the pit in cross-section, the ring of rollers it rode on, the little water level he kept set into the deck of the bridge. "You did not trust your eye on a turntable," Hal had written. "The eye's bris on a long span. You trust the bubble. You set the bridge dead level before you ever ran an engine onto it. A locomotive weighs as much as a house. A bridge half a hair off true would bind on the rollers and stick. A stuck table on a cold morning could lose you an hour, and an hour on the railroad was money out of every man's pocket down the line. Your father got quick at it," Edna said. "By his second winter he could level that bridge in the dark. I watched him do it once, in a snow so thick you couldn't see the far stalls. He had the feel of it by then." Hal stood back and let him, and he had a look on his face I only ever saw the once. "What look?" Levi said. Edna thought about how to say it. "The look a man gets," she said, "when something he made is about to outlast him, and he's glad of it, and it scares him a little." She turned a few more pages. There was a lesson on packing a journal box with waste cotton and oil, so the wicking would draw the oil up against the turning axle all night without anybody tending it. There was a lesson on reading rail by the shine of it, where the wheels rode and where they didn't. There was a lesson on what to do when a knuckle coupler froze in January. You never forced it. Never. A forced coupler would let go at the worst possible moment, and it would take a man's fingers with it. Patience. Hal had written under that one, underlined twice. Patience is the whole job. Everything else is just knowing where to put the patience. Levi read that line too more than once. He could see it. His father at 22, younger than Levi was now, down in the cold pit with the foreman's screwdriver pressed to his skull, listening for the secret hum of a thing nobody else could hear, getting it on the third try. And the older man writing it down in his book like a proud parent, marking a height on a doorframe. His father had never told him any of it. Not the railroad, not Hal, not the screwdriver or the brass tag or the 8 acres of woods. 22 months, Levi had grieved a man he was only now beginning to understand he had half known, and the half he had not known was lying here in a cold building, waiting for him in a dead stranger's handwriting. He kept finding things. There was the wedding, for one. Edna told him about it on the third morning, almost by accident, while they were sorting the bottom drawer of the toolbox. Roy had married Levi's mother, Diane, in the spring of 1990 at the little Methodist church up on Ridge Street. Hal had come. He had sat in the very back pew, in a suit nobody had ever seen him wear before or after, and he had not said a word to anyone. He left before the rice. Diane had asked Roy later who the old man in the back was, and Roy had only said, "An old friend from the yard," and let it go at that. That was Hal all over, Edna said. He'd show up for the thing that mattered. He just couldn't bear to be thanked for it. Thanking embarrassed him worse than anything I ever saw. There was the day the line closed, too. In 2001, the freight contracts dried up, and by 2003, the Belfield Pacific ran its last train. Edna remembered the morning they shut it down. Hal had walked every stall, she said, the way a man walks the rooms of a house he is leaving. He had stood a long time at the turntable. Then he had gone home. The next day he had come back with a bucket and a rag, and he had started cleaning a building nobody owned anymore. A building nobody would ever use again. He did it for 20 more years. Nobody paid him. Nobody asked him to. "Why?" Levi said. Edna was quiet a moment. Because somewhere in here, she said, was the best part of his life, and he wasn't ready to let the weather have it. There was the day Roy left as well, and that one cost Edna more to tell. Roy had not stayed on the railroad. Around 1995, with a wife and a small boy and a line that was already dying, he had taken a job at a garage 2 towns over, fixing trucks. It paid better, and it was steadier, and there was no shame in it. But it had been a hard thing between the two men all the same. Edna had been in the office the day Roy told Hal he was leaving. There had been no argument. Hal had just nodded, the way he nodded at most things, and said it was the right call for a man with a family. And then he did the strangest thing, Edna said. The morning of Roy's interview at that garage, Hal drove him over himself, 40 minutes each way. Didn't say a word the whole trip, either direction. Roy told me about it years later, still puzzling over it. Hal just wanted to make sure he got there, and got there steady. Then he drove home and never once let on it had cost him anything. Did they stay in touch? Levi asked. Some, less than they should have. You know how it goes. Men like that, they think there's always more time. Edna folded her hands. There's a note in that book, near the middle. Your father wrote it, not Hal. Only entry in there that isn't Hal's hand. It's from '96. You should find it yourself. Levi did find it that night. A single line in his father's blocky print, on a page otherwise full of Hal's lessons. For everything I can't repay. Artie, nothing else. No date but the year, no explanation. Just a man thanking another man for a debt too large to name, in the only book where he knew it would be kept. In the bottom of the toolbox there was a ledger, a small one, columns of figures in Hal's hand. It took Levi most of an afternoon to understand what it was. They were loans, small ones. $40 to a man named Petty in 1988. $100 to the Garrison family in the winter of '89. 25 here, 60 there, a column of dates running back decades, and beside each entry, in the place where a businessman would have marked the interest, Hal had written nothing at all. There was no record of any of them being paid back. There was no sign Hal had ever expected them to be. Some of the names Levi knew, not the people but the names. Garrison was painted on the side of the hardware store on Main. There was a Petty who ran the feed store out by the county line. Levi had bought a propane bottle from him just that fall and never thought a thing about it. There was a Vasco, and a Vasco taught 3rd grade at the elementary, and a Reardon, and the Riardons still had the dairy up the Ridge Road. The whole ledger was the town. Quietly, over 30 years, a man with a foreman's wage had carried half of Belfield through its bad winters, $40 and $60 and $100 at a time. He had asked for none of it back and let none of them say his name. Levi turned the pages slowly. He understood by the end of the afternoon that he was holding a kind of map, not of money, of a town held together at its weak places by one stubborn man in amounts too small for anyone to brag about, over years too long for anyone to notice. The richest thing in the locker was not the bonds. It was this small book of debts that a dead man had never once tried to collect. And there were bonds. Levi found them in a flat tin box on the locker's bottom shelf under a folded shop apron. United States savings bonds, the old paper kind, a thick sheaf held with a rubber band gone brittle. He pulled one out and the rubber band snapped to dust. He read the face of it. It was issued in 1985, and the name printed on it, the registered owner, was not Hal Cobbett. It was Roy Dawson. Levi turned it over with hands that had gone numb. There was a beneficiary line, the name of the person who would receive the bond if the owner died. On that line, on a bond bought the year Levi was not yet even born, somebody had written a name in Hal Cobbett's hard, careful hand. Levi Dawson. He sat down on the cold concrete and did not get up for a while. On the 4th day, his uncle called. Levi had not heard Dennis Dawson's voice in 12 years. Not since a funeral that was not his father's, the one before some aunt or other. The two brothers had said words to each other in a parking lot that day, and the words had ended whatever there was between them. Dennis had seen the notice in the county paper. A Roundhouse, transferred for $10. He wanted to know what it was worth. "You're my brother's kid," Dennis said. "That makes it half mine. That's just how it works, Levi." "You weren't there," Levi said. "I was at the funeral." "You weren't there for any of the rest of it." Levi's voice was very level. He had learned to keep it level. 22 months. "You didn't call once. I slept in his truck for 14 of them, and you never asked where I was sleeping. You don't get to be here now." "I'm your only blood," Dennis said. "When the dust settles, I'm the only blood you've got left in this world." Levi looked at the brass tag on the workbench. at the photograph of the two young men grinning beside the engine. "No," he said, "you're not." He ended the call. Dennis tried back twice, and Levi let it ring out. After that, the phone went quiet and stayed quiet. His uncle did not come to Belfield. That door, Levi understood, was simply going to stay shut. He found that he did not mind. Not everything in a life gets mended. A man learns which broken things are worth the grief of trying. There was a developer, too. A man named Rasinger found him at the coffee place by the highway on the 5th day. A pleasant man in a quarter-zip pullover who slid into the booth uninvited and laid out a vision. Loft apartments, exposed brick. The market was hungry for exposed brick, he said. He named a number, $50,000 for the building and the land, cash, fast, no inspection. Rasinger would take it as it sat. He said the word potential several times. He said it was a generous offer for a liability, and that much was true, and Levi did not doubt the man meant well by his own lights. "I'll think about it," Levi said. It was a thing he said when he meant no. Rasinger left his card on the table and shook Levi's hand and went away. He did not come back. Levi left the card by the napkins for the next person who needed something to write on. $50,000. It was more money than Levi had ever heard named in a single breath. It would have bought him out of the truck, out of the cold, out of the whole hard arithmetic of his life. And he knew, sitting there with the cold coffee, that he was not going to take it. The reason had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with a screwdriver pressed against a man's skull in a cold pit 40 years before. I keep coming back to one thing in this story. Not the bonds, not the deed, not the $50,000 a stranger offered for a ruin. I keep coming back to a chewed pencil, a flat carpenter's pencil soft at one end where a dead man's teeth had worked it. A boy kept it in a glove box and put it between his own teeth in the dark because it was the last warm thing his father had ever touched. That is the detail that will not leave me. Hold on to it. It matters more than the money. It was Edna who finally told him about the motels. They were sitting in the cold office on the 5th evening, the brass clicker between them on the desk. Levi had asked her plainly, the question that had been building in him all week. Why a stranger had spent the last hours of his life on a will, for a boy he had never once spoken to. Edna was quiet a long time. "Did your father ever tell you," she said at last, "about the winter you near froze?" 2 winters back. The bad cold snap, right after he passed. Levi went still. He remembered it. The first winter alone, before he had learned the tricks of it. The temperature had dropped to 9 below and held there a week. He had lain struck, certain he was going to die in that parking lot, and that nobody would find him until the thaw. "There were 4 nights, he said slowly. "I don't know how to explain it. I went to the food pantry for a sandwich, and the woman there gave me an envelope. Said it was from a church fund. 4 nights at the Belfield Motor Court. I never figured out which church. I tried to thank somebody, and nobody would claim it. There wasn't any church," Edna said. She turned the brass clicker over in her old fingers. Click, click, the worn brass caught the last of the light. Hal paid for those nights. He drove the money to the pantry himself and made the woman swear she'd never say his name. Edna's voice did not waver, but it slowed. "He'd been watching you since your dad died, Levi, from a distance. He couldn't bring himself to walk up to you. I never fully understood why, though I think I do now." She set the clicker down. "But he knew where you slept. He knew when it got bad, and when it got to 9 below, he made sure you had a roof for the worst of it, and he made sure you'd never know it was him." Levi sat in the cold with his hands open in his lap. For 2 winters he had believed himself entirely alone in the world, one man in a truck in an empty lot, unseen by anyone living, and the whole time a stranger had been sitting somewhere in this town, knowing his name, counting the cold nights on a brass clicker worn gold by his thumb, keeping watch. He had never been alone at all. He had only thought he was. He went back out to stall 7 that night, late with the work light running off the truck battery. The tomcat Hal used to feed was there, a one-eared gray brawler the railroad men had named Switch, after the switchman who throws the track. It curled on top of the locker and watched him with its single yellow eye. He took up the red notebook again. Near the back he found a clean page where Hal had drawn a wheel and an axle and written out one more lesson. How to check the side play on a journal, how to set a bar against the wheel and rock it and feel for the slack, how to know by the give of it whether the brass was worn past saving or had years left in it yet. Levi went down into the cold pit. He found a length of bar in the toolbox. He set it against the rusted wheel of the turntable the way the drawing showed, and he rocked it, and he felt for the slack. He could not tell, not yet. He did not have the hands for it yet, but he could feel, under the rust, the place where the knowing lived, and he understood that it was a thing a person could learn. The way his father had learned it on the third try, in this same cold pit, 40 years before. He worked at it a while longer. He set the bubble level into the deck of the bridge, the way the turntable page had shown, and he watched it drift off true and centered it again. He swept the worst of the leaf litter out of stall 7. He stacked the fallen slate from the roof in a neat pile by the door. He stacked it the way you stack a thing you mean to use again, not a thing you mean to throw away. The work warmed him. It was the first work in 2 years that was for something instead of just for the next meal. Outside, the frost was coming down hard. He could hear it, almost in the silence between the trucks idling and the small sounds of the cat. The chestnut oaks ticked as the cold worked into them. A barred owl called once from the woods Hal had owned, the 8 acres Levi now owned and had not yet walked, and another answered it from across the river. He stayed until 2 in the morning. The cat stayed with him, and the sealed envelope sat up on the shelf where he had left it on the first day, with his full name across the front, in a dead man's hand, waiting for its hour. Levi looked at it a long while before he killed the work light. He knew the time was coming when he would have to read it. He knew, too, that whatever was inside would change the shape of everything he thought he understood about the man who raised him. He was not ready, not quite, but he was getting there. He read the letter on the 9th day. It was a Sunday, and the town was quiet, and the frost had given way to a cold, clear morning. The sky was the hard blue of a gas flame. Levi had put it off as long as he could. He knew that once he read it, there would be no unreading it. Whatever he understood about his father afterward would not be the thing he had carried for 19 years. He made himself coffee on the camp stove in the freight office. He let it go cold, the way he always did. Then he went out to stall 7, and he sat on the overturned crate where Edna sat, and he took the sealed envelope down off the shelf. He opened it with his pocket knife, slow so as not to tear the paper. The handwriting was the same hard-pressed hand from the slip of numbers. It pressed so hard in places it had nearly gone through the page. A man not used to writing the thing he had waited his whole life to say. "Levi," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone and you opened the locker and Edna kept her promise. I asked a lot of that woman over the years. She never once charged me for it. I am not good with words on paper. I will try to be plain. I met your father in the spring of 1981. He came to me with a duffel bag and nothing else. 22 years old, no people the same as you are now. He had a quiet way of touching engines. I cannot explain it better than that. Most men grab at machinery like they mean to win an argument with it. Your father laid his hands on it like he was listening. I taught him everything I knew. He learned it faster than I did, and after a while he did not need me anymore. That is how it is supposed to go. It does not make it easy. There is something I should tell you. I have started this letter 4 times trying to find the way. In 1979 I had a wife. Her name was Margaret. We were going to have a boy. We had already settled on the name. We were going to call him Roy, after her father, who was a switchman on this line for 30 years. Margaret died in the winter of that year. The boy died with her, before he ever drew a breath. I never told anyone the name we picked. There was no one left to tell it to. 2 years later, a stranger walked into my roundhouse and said his name was Roy. I want you to understand, I did not think he was a ghost. I am not a foolish man, but I had carried that name 2 years like a stone in my coat, and here it was, walking around alive, 22 and needing somebody. Your father came to me one night in 1984, after the bad derailment over in Tyrone. He was shook up. He said something to me about being afraid that Levi stopped. The line ended there. The pen had stopped. After it, the page was blank for half an inch. Then the writing started again lower down, in the same hand but heavier, as if the man had set the letter aside a long time before he came back to it. I find I cannot write the rest of that. I have decided you do not need it. Some things a man keeps because keeping them is the last thing he can still do for somebody. I bought a savings bond in your father's name in '85. I bought one most years after. I put your name on them when you were born. By then I knew there would not be anyone else to look after you if it came to it, and it came to it. The brass tag was the first thing your father ever lost on this job. Number 7, his stall. I found it under the workbench and I kept it. He laughed when I told him I still had it. He never knew how long I would keep it, or why. You were never a stranger to me, Levi. Not for one day of your life. I am sorry I could not find the way to walk up and say so while there was still time. That was my failing, not yours. Take care of the place if you can. Let it go if you can't. Either way, you were seen, Hal." Levi sat for a long time with the pages in his lap. The roundhouse made its small cold sounds around him. A pigeon shifted in the rafters. Out in the yard, a length of loose tin lifted in the wind and set itself back down. He read the letter again, and then a third time. On the third time, he understood the thing that had been waiting under all of it, patient as the building. His father had known. Not all of it, maybe. Not Margaret, not the name, not the stone Hal had carried alone for 45 years. But Roy had known about the bonds. The note in the red book in his father's blocky hand said, "For everything I can't repay." That was the note of a man who knew exactly what he was being given and had no way to give anything back. Roy had known, and Roy had never told Levi. Levi understood now that this had not been a lie. It had been a kind of pride, the only kind his father had ever been able to afford. A man who has been carried does not always know how to tell his son he was carried. So he says nothing. He keeps the note in the book. He hopes the boy finds it someday and is gentle with him for it. Levi found that he was gentle with him for it. He went and found Edna at the freight office, and he showed her the line that stopped. The one about the derailment. The one Hal could not finish. He cried writing that part, Edna said. He did not look away when she said it. I was there. I held the pen for him at the end when his hands got too bad. He got to that line, and he set my hand down on the desk, and he said, "Edna, stop." She pressed her lips together, and we sat there a while, and then he said, "Leave it where it stops. She'll know to leave it alone." "She," Levi said. He meant you. He always said she. I don't know why. The dying get their words crossed. Edna's mouth worked, but he knew it'd be you who read it. He was sure of that as he was sure of anything at the end. What do you think he was going to write? Edna shook her head, slow. I don't think it matters what the words were. I think your daddy was afraid of the same thing every man down here was afraid of, that he'd disappear, and nobody would have marked that he was here at all. She put her old hand flat on the workbench. Hal marked it, that's the whole of it. Hal spent his life marking down men nobody else bothered to count. And when your father got afraid, late one night, that he was one of the uncounted ones, well, I expect Hal told him otherwise. I expect that's the part he couldn't bear to write down twice. Levi sat with that. Tell me about her, he said after a while. Margaret. So Edna told him. She had not spoken the name aloud in years, and it came slow at first, then easier. Margaret Cobbett had taught the second grade at the Belfield school. She was a small woman with a loud laugh, Edna said. The kind of laugh you do not expect from a small woman. She had courted Hal by bringing him pie he was too shy to ask the price of. They married in the autumn of '76. She was carrying the baby by the next winter, and she was happy. Hal walked around the yard that year like a man let in on a secret the rest of the world had somehow missed. And then she was gone, Edna said. Both of them, the same night. The doctor said it was her blood pressure, that there wasn't a thing anybody could have done. Hal didn't speak for the better part of a month. He came to work. He did the job. He just didn't speak. And then one Monday he started speaking again, and he never said her name to me again until the day I held the pen for him. She looked at her hands. 45 years. He carried her 45 years and let almost nobody help him hold it. That was the worst of Hal and the best of him, both. He thought the only thing he was good for was carrying things other people set down. Levi thought of his father, 22 and afraid in the dark of 1984. He thought of an older man across the pit who had just learned this frightened stray was named for a child he had buried. He thought of all the years after, the bonds, the brass tag, the 4 nights at the Belfield Motor Court at 9 below. It was not a story about money. It had never once been a story about money. There was a thing Edna had not told him, and she told it now, because he had asked about Margaret, and the asking had opened a door. Hal's funeral had been small. Smaller than small. 11 people, Edna said, in a church that sat 200. The pastor had not really known him, and had said the things pastors say. There had been no family in the front pew, because there was no family. The man had carried half the town through its bad winters. He had counted every soul that passed through his yard on a brass clicker worn gold by his thumb. And he had gone to the ground with 11 mourners and a hired pastor who got the middle name wrong. And I'll tell you what I kept thinking, Edna said. Her voice was steady, but it cost her to keep it so. I kept thinking every one of these empty pews is somebody he helped. They just never knew it was him to come and sit for. He spent 40 years making sure his name stayed off of everything. And then he died, and the bill came due, and the church was empty. That's what it costs, doing good in secret. I don't think Hal ever once added up that part of it. Levi did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would not have made it smaller. But he thought about the 11 empty rows. He thought about the casserole woman who learned the name from the obituary, and the engineer who would come in April and weep with his hand on a dead engine. He thought that the pews had not stayed empty exactly. They had only filled up late. The whole spring that was coming would be the town arriving, 6 months behind, to a funeral nobody had known to attend. Edna gave him the key to Hal's house, too. It was a small frame house on Sumac Street, white paint gone to gray, a porch that needed a board. Levi let himself in one afternoon and stood in the front room and understood the man a little more. There was almost nothing in it. A chair, a bed made tight as a bunk, a kitchen with one plate, one cup, one fork in the drawer, as if Hal had pared his life down to the exact size of one man, so that nothing would be wasted when he was gone. On the wall over the chair there was a single framed photograph. Margaret, young, laughing in a summer dress, on a day Levi would never know anything about, and tucked into the corner of the same frame, small, almost hidden, a second picture. 2 men beside a diesel engine grinning. Hal and Roy. 1981. Hal had kept them in the same frame, the wife he lost and the boy he found, the only 2 photographs in a house stripped down to nothing. Levi stood in front of it until the light moved off the wall, and then he locked the house up careful behind him, and he did not go back. Some rooms you visit once. Once is the whole of what they are for. There was the matter of the night in 1984 as well, the night. The letter would not finish. Edna knew the bones of it, though not the heart. There had been a derailment over in Tyrone that winter, a bad one, a tank car off the rails and a man from the Tyrone crew killed under it. Roy had been sent over to help with the cleanup, 3 days in the cold among the wreckage. He had come back changed, Edna said, quieter. He had gone to Hal's that night late. The 2 of them had sat up until morning, and whatever Roy had needed to say, he had said it to Hal, and to no one else, ever. Edna did not know the words. She had never asked. Some conversations, she said, you can tell by a man's face afterward that you are not meant to ask about, and you do him the kindness of not asking. Whatever it was, she said, Hal carried it the rest of his life, and he chose not to set it down on you, even at the end, even when his hand was shaking too bad to hold the pen. That wasn't him hiding something from you, Levi. That was the last gift he had left to give. He took a weight off your father once, and he decided to keep it off you too. Levi sat with that for a long while. He found in the days after that he did not want to know the words either. The unfinished line in the letter had stopped being a mystery to him. It had become a kind of door left politely closed by a man who had closed a great many doors politely in his life, to spare the people on the other side. Levi let it stay closed. It seemed the only fitting answer to a thing like that. He went back to the work because the work was the only language he had for any of it. He spent a week down in the pit with the red book open beside him. He learned the journal boxes one at a time. He packed them with waste cotton and oil, the way Hal had written it out 40 years before. His hands were clumsy at first and then less so. He did the side play test again on the turntable axle. This time he could feel it, the small honest give of brass that still had years left in it. He understood then what his father had understood on the 3rd try in 1981. It was not a hard thing, once your hands knew it. It was only a thing nobody had ever shown him until a dead man's book did. In the evenings he went back through the locker, slow, with the meaning changed on everything in it. The photograph was the worst of it and the best. 2 young men beside an engine, grinning. He had looked at it the first day and seen 2 strangers, now he saw the whole of it. He saw a foreman of 33 who had buried a wife and a son named Roy. He saw a stray of 22 who had walked in 2 years later carrying that same name, like he did not know what it weighed. Neither man in that picture knew yet what they were to each other. That was the thing that got him. They were just 2 men at the start of a long kindness. They did not know it had started, and the camera caught them not knowing. He went back through the ledger of loans too, and understood it differently now. It was not a record of charity. Charity keeps a tally so it can feel good about the total. This book kept no total. Hal had never once added the columns. He had only written each loan down, the $40, the 100, the date, and the name. Then he left a blank where the world expected a number. It came to Levi slowly what the blank was for. The blank was the point. The blank said this was never a loan. This was only a thing I could do, so I did it. I wrote it here so that one of us would remember it happened, and it did not need to be you. He closed the book and sat in the cold a while. His father had lived inside that blank space his whole working life, Levi thought, had been raised in it, in a way, by the man across the pit, and then his father had passed it down without a word, in a chewed pencil, a torn manual, 1,000 small steady things a boy only understood the shape of after the man was gone. That was the real inheritance. The money was just the part you could put a number to. The rest of it had no number, and never would, and was worth more. Cyrus Penny gave him the number on a Tuesday, in the office that smelled of pipe tobacco. The bonds had matured. There was the cash from the locker, a little over $3,000. There was a bank account in Hal's name with $61,000 in it that came to Levi as the sole beneficiary, and there was a life insurance policy Hal had taken out in the fall of 2004, the year after the line closed, the year after Roy left the railroad for good. The policy named Levi. It had named Levi for 22 years, since before Levi could read his own name. Penny put it all together on a single sheet of paper and slid it across the desk. The figure at the bottom was $186,000. Levi looked at it for a while. Most boys in your spot, Penny said, not unkindly, would already be asking me how fast they can have it. I'm not most boys, Levi said. No, Penny agreed. I'm beginning to gather you're not. Levi did not weep that night, the way you might think. He was not built for it, and neither were the men he came from. He went back out to stall 7, with the work light burning low off the truck battery, and the cat asleep on top of the locker. It was past 2 in the morning, the hour he was always awake. He had the brass tag in his hand. He turned it over and over, the worn face and the stamped face, the number 7 that had been his father's stall before Levi was a thought in the world. He sat very still. Once his shoulders went, a single hard pull, the way a rope pulls taut and holds. He pressed the cold brass to his forehead and held it there a long time. He had been remembered all those years. He had believed himself invisible, a boy in a truck in an empty lot, and the whole time he had been written down. Counted, watched over from a distance by a man too shy of his own goodness to ever once say hello. He had been remembered. In the end, that was the only thing. The money was just the shape the remembering happened to take. There was no proper word for what Hal had done that Levi knew of. The closest one was the word Hal had chosen himself at the very end of the letter, after everything else had been said as plainly as a shy man could say it. Seen. You were seen. Levi held the brass tag and the word together in the dark, and they fit, and that was enough. The spring came late to that part of Pennsylvania, the way it always does, holding off through a raw gray March before it gave in all at once in April. By then the roundhouse had changed. Levi had spent the winter at it. Stalls 1 through 7 were swept clean now, the floors clear, the fallen slate carried out. He had boarded the broken windows against the weather with lumber he milled himself, from a storm-dropped oak on the 8 acres. The turntable was greased and ran true. He could swing it now with one hand and a long bar. He did it the way the book had shown, the way his father had done it in the dark in a snowstorm 40 years before. He had the feel of it at last. It had taken him most of the winter to get the feel. He had not touched stall 1. Stall 1 had taken the worst of the water over the years. The foreman before Hal had let it go, and Levi found he did not want to fix it. He left it the way it was, the water stain spread dark across the brick like the shadow of a thing no longer there. A record, he decided. A record of what the place had been before anybody came back for it. Not every room in a life gets put right. He had learned that from a man he never met, in a letter that stopped in the middle of a sentence. He had moved into the small apartment over the old freight office. Edna owned it. She charged him $1 a month, and when he tried to pay more, she looked at him in a way that ended the discussion. It was 2 rooms and a hot plate and a window that looked out on the yard. It was the first door Levi had closed behind himself and known it was his to open again in more than 2 years. The 8 acres he left standing. He walked them most evenings. He did not cut the timber, though a man from the mill had offered good money for the white oak. He did not sell the back parcel, though it would have paid for the roof twice over. He could not have said exactly why, only that some things are worth more left where they are, holding the shape of the person who saved them, than they ever are turned into money. Hal had taught him that without once meaning to. It was written all through the ledger of loans nobody paid back. There was a grave to find, too, and he found it. The Cobbett plot was up on the hill behind the Methodist church, under a chestnut oak that was just then coming into leaf. There were 3 stones, Margaret Cobbett, and beside her a small one, no name on it, only a date in the winter of '79. And beside them both the newest Henry Cobbett, with the dates and nothing else, because Hal had left instructions that there were to be no words. Levi stood there a long time. He had brought nothing, and felt foolish for it. Then he took the second brass tag out of his pocket, the one he had not yet decided what to do with. He held it a moment in the cold. Then he put it back. It was not for here. He knew that much. It belonged at the Roundhouse. He just did not yet know how. He tried to call his mother, once that spring. He had found an old number in his father's things, a Diane Dawson, with an area code from somewhere out west. He sat with the phone a long while one evening before he dialed it. It rang 4 times and went to a recording that was not her voice, a stranger's voice. The number had been reassigned to somebody who had never heard of any of them. He did not try again. That door, like the other one, was simply going to stay shut. He found he could stand in front of it now without the old ache. Some people leave and do not come back. It is not always a thing you did. He was learning to let that be true and let it lie, and not pick at it. The town began to come that spring. He had not expected it. It started with a man named Cole, somewhere near 50, who pulled up one Saturday in a work truck. He stood in the doorway of stall 7 with his cap in his hands. He had read about it in the county paper, he said. The Roundhouse, the boy, the $10. He had something to return. He held out a pipe wrench, old, the handle worn dark with use. Your daddy borrowed this off me in '83, Cole said. We were both green then. I always meant to ask for it back. Then it got to be too long, and you can't ask for a thing back after 20 years. It's rude. He set it on the workbench. Anyway, it was never really mine to keep. It's yours now. He left before Levi could think what to say. After Cole, there were others. A woman named Sutter came with a casserole dish and would not take no for an answer. While Levi ate, she told him a thing. Hal Cobbett had paid 2 months of her family's rent in the winter of '89, when her husband was hurt and could not work. She had never once known the man's last name. Not until she read it in the county paper, beside the word die. A man came with a pair of work boots, size 11, oiled and kept all these years. Your father left these at my shop in '02, he said. I never had the heart to throw out a dead man's boots. He set them by the door and stayed only a minute. A retired engineer came just to walk the stalls. He put his hand flat on the cold flank of the one engine left in the building, an old switcher rusted to the rails. He did not say much of anything at all. When he left, his eyes were wet, and he shook Levi's hand hard. Your daddy was a good hand, he said. Hall too, you come from good hands. Then he got in his car and drove off, and Levi never learned his name. The strangest one came on the last Saturday in April. An old woman, older than Edna, in a coat too heavy for the day, brought a tin of buttons, that was all. A coffee tin full of mismatched buttons, the kind a woman saves off worn-out shirts for 60 years. She set it on the workbench. She told Levi that Hal Cobbett had walked her home every evening for the better part of a year, back in 1979, after her own husband passed. She had been afraid of the dark stretch by the rail yard. He never said a word the whole walk, she said. He just appeared at her gate at quitting time and walked her the half-mile and tipped his cap and went on. He did it until she was not afraid anymore. Then he stopped, and they never once spoke of it. I don't know why I kept these, she said, touching the tin. I just knew when I read he was gone that I wanted to bring something to wherever he'd been, and this is where he was, so. She left the buttons. Levi put them on the shelf in stall 7, next to the red book, and there they stayed. He understood by then the shape of it. People did not bring back what they owed, because there had never been any owing. They brought back what they had carried. A pipe wrench, a pair of boots, a tin of buttons, a year of dark walks nobody ever named. 40 years of one man's quiet, coming home a little at a time. Coming home to a building that had been 3 weeks from the wrecking ball. They came all through April in 1s and 2s, on Saturdays mostly. Each of them brought a piece of it, a name, a debt, a small kept thing. There was a boy too, near the end of the month, maybe 12, all elbows, on a bicycle too small for him. He started showing up on Saturday mornings and standing at the edge of the turntable, watching Levi work, not saying anything. The third Saturday, Levi handed him the long bar without a word and showed him where to set it. The two of them swung the bridge around together. The boy laughed out loud at the size of the thing moving under his hands. He came back the Saturday after that. Levi did not ask whose he was or where he slept or whether anyone was waiting on him at home. He had a notion he already knew the shape of it. He just left the doors open and put the bar in the boy's hands and let the building do the rest, the way it had been doing for 100 years. That became the thing in time, the open doors. Levi took to leaving the big stall doors standing open on Saturdays, the near ones that still had their roofs, and word got around the way word gets around in a town that size. People came to look. Old railroad men, mostly, at first the ones still living, who walked the stalls slow and touched the cold iron and told each other stories Levi half understood. Then their wives. Then people who had no connection to the railroad at all, who had only heard there was a boy who had fixed up the old roundhouse and did not seem to mind company. Levi put a coffee pot on. He did not charge for the coffee. It seemed to him that a man who charged for coffee in that building had not understood the building at all. Levi began to understand what he had inherited. It was not a building. It was not even the $186,000, though the number had stopped frightening him and started, slowly, to look like a tool instead of a prize. What he had inherited was a town's worth of small mercies. They had been carried in secret by two quiet men across 40 years, and now they were being handed down to him, one Saturday at a time, in pipe wrenches and casserole dishes, by people who had only just learned whom to thank. He used a little of the money that spring on the things that could not wait, a new roof over stalls 1 through 4, though he left stall 1's interior just as it was beneath it, a water pump for the truck, at last. A proper stove for the apartment over the freight office. He paid off the small debt his father had left at the garage 2 towns over, the one nobody had ever come asking about. It seemed wrong to him. Wrong to take a fortune from one man's careful kindness and leave another man's small bill unpaid. The rest he let sit. He was in no hurry. The men he came from had never been in a hurry about anything that mattered. He kept the brass tag with him through all of it. On a Saturday near the end of the month, in the long gold light of an evening that finally felt like spring, Levi did the last thing. He went into stall 7, to the locker, and he opened it. It held no secrets now, only the ordinary things of a working life, and one red leather book he would keep until he was an old man himself. He hung the brass tag back on its hook inside the door where it belonged, number 7, his father's stall. Beside it he hung a second tag. He had cut it himself over the winter from a scrap of brass and stamped it by hand the way the old tags were stamped, clumsy. The numerals not quite straight, it bore a single numeral, 1. He hung it next to the 7, and he did not fully understand why he had made it, except for this. Somewhere a long time ago there had been a boy who was meant to be called Roy. He never got a stall or a number or a chance to lose a key under a workbench. It seemed to Levi that he ought to be counted too. Hal had counted everyone else. Somebody ought to count Hal's. He closed the locker door. He did not lock it. He let the combination hang open on its hasp, the way you leave a door you mean for people to come through. Outside, the crocuses had come up purple through the old cinder bed where the coal piles used to stand. Levi stood in the doorway of the roundhouse and watched the light go down over the river. Copper again, the way it had been on the October afternoon when a stranger's name first found him. The turntable held its center. The brass was warm now with use. The place was not a ruin anymore, and it was not finished either, and he thought that was about right. Edna sat on the bench by the freight office, the cat switch heavy and asleep across her lap. She watched the boy walk out toward the 8 acres in the last of the light. "He'll be all right now," she said to nobody, to the cat. "He knows he was kept." The owls had started up in the woods. Levi walked toward them into the trees a stranger had bought once and never told a soul about. The dark took him gently. Behind him the lights of the roundhouse held steady in the long blue dusk. He had never been invisible. Some men simply remember in silence until the silence runs out. I nearly cut the chewed pencil in half. It seemed too insignificant to matter. A flat carpenter's pencil worn down by a deceased man's teeth, kept by his son in a glove compartment in his car and chewed on in the dark. But it was the detail that kept coming to mind. Not the money, not the will. It was the letter my mother left me before she left. We don't always get the chance to thank those who quietly made a place for us. Sometimes we only find out much later. This story is fictional. The names and towns are made up, but I don't think the underlying emotion is fictional. This story ended well for the boy. For the old man, in a way, it ended 45 years too late. He spent a life making sure other people were counted, and almost no one thought to count him. I changed the names in the town. The rest I built from the kind of quiet most of us have watched happen and never said out loud. If there's someone who quietly kept a place for you, you don't have to tell me about it in the comments. Just sit with it a day or two. That's enough. The doors don't stay open forever, and the people who hold them rarely ask to be thanked.